and we are going to start with a Zoom presentation by Sea Rotmann from Sustainable Energy Advice Ltd. And then are going to be about investigation into unintended consequences. Oh, that sounds very interesting. So I will give 30 more seconds to the people just to take their places. And yeah, I think, see, you could start. I can see your slide. We're good to go. All right.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much. I wish I could be down there with you in beautiful Ōtepoti, but I'm sitting here in Golden Bay on my farm instead. So I am going to talk about the international research project, research collaboration that I lead under the User-Centered Energy Systems Technology Collaboration Program by the International Energy Agency, or Users TCP by IEA, which is a big mouthful. And we've been doing this for 5 years. It's called the Hard to Reach Energy Users Task, and I am focusing on the first year of phase 2, which started earlier this year, and which is around investigating unintended consequences. So very quickly, I just need to highlight that the users TCP is functionally and legally autonomous from the IEA Secretariat. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the International Energy Agency here. Very quickly, I do want to acknowledge that there is a real issue with the term hard to reach energy users. We wrote a whole book characterizing them, and there's a whole chapter in it just talking about how problematic the terminology is. However, it is very commonly used, and we also defined it very broadly to make sure that we capture all hard to reach energy users, not just those who are low income, which is what people usually jump to the conclusion when they hear the words hard to reach. Actually, low income people, not necessarily hard to reach at all. So our shared goal in the second phase is to identify, listen to, elevate, and empower priority voices so as to be guided by their experiences, insights, and needs to achieve a truly just energy system transition for all. And priority voices and communities are those who are currently hidden, missed, underserved, or intentionally underinvested in by decision makers. So we're going away from hard to reach and focusing specifically on hidden or invisible energy users, including those who live in hidden hardship. Why does this not go to the next page? Oops. Okay, so our research questions, the ones that I'm focusing on right now are really just the first two. First one's around just looking at what steps are taken around the world towards achieving a just energy transition. And the second one is what are some of the unintended consequences of some of the well-intentioned efforts that may have happened. And so just to define unintended consequences should be pretty obvious, but they refer to unexpected or unforeseen outcomes that result from a particular action or intervention, especially those that may contradict the intended goals of the action. And again, we're specifically looking through the lens of energy equity from a hidden energy user perspective. So the methodology for this report was a literature review on unintended consequences and broader energy justice, energy equity issues. There is a lot on energy justice and energy equity, and not so much. There's some really good stuff on unintended consequences, but it's not very deep. So we're hoping to contribute to that literature. Then we did a program review for MB in 2022 for the Energy Hardship Expert Panel of 67 programs in 20 plus countries in North America, Europe, the UK, and Australia. We then did a policy analysis of those programs, which is currently under review. So hopefully that paper is going to come out soon. And then we did a stakeholder assessment. We polled some of our workshop attendees at the Behave conference at the end of last year. We did a Qualtrics survey, and then we did some in-depth interviews with program managers for 19 of those case studies in 8 countries. Countries that are financially participating in this task are Aotearoa New Zealand via the Electricity Authority, Sweden via the Swedish Energy Agency, and the United States via the Department of Energy, which I hope will survive the upcoming administration. So very quickly, the policy analysis showed that there were really 2 policy pillars that these programs were largely focused on. One was around narratives around energy hardship, and the other one was around market barriers and failures. with energy efficiency. Most of the policy goals aimed at reducing barriers around finance, knowledge, or technology. Most of the policy instruments were economic. About 25% of them were information and capacity building and some R&D. And the stakeholders, even though there were quite diverse coalitions, government was predominant both in funding and implementation. And so the main gaps were that there wasn't enough participatory co-design with the community sector, and also a bit of a shortage of evidence-based evaluations, which is always a problem with these kind of programs. So some of the case studies that we looked at, we grouped them into 6 major themes. They were around electricity pricing and tariffs, home upgrades and retrofits, decarbonisation, electrification, EVs, overarching government policy around the just transition, and then energy information, education, and behaviour change campaigns. So in Aotearoa New Zealand, I looked at several things, but these are 3 big ones: the low fixed energy user charges, which are probably one of the best examples for unintended consequences, the Warmer Kiwi Homes grant, which is really great, but definitely had also got some unintended consequences, particularly around the heat pump rollout, and then the consumer care guidelines, which were designed to be voluntary and are now being made mandatory, which is causing the EA currently a bit of head scratching. However, I'm not going to focus on the New Zealand case studies because most of you will probably be quite familiar with them. So I thought I'll give you some flavor of some of the North American ones, just some initial early insights. So on the electricity pricing and tariff, our colleagues at the Consortium for Energy Efficiency looked at PG&E, which is one of the largest utilities, especially in California, and their behavioral demand response programs. So they had one program called Smart Rate that provided bill credits for those who meet reduced demand during peak events, but then it offers penalties for those who don't. And what they found was that California alternative rates for energy or care eligible low-income customers that participate in these programs in 2023, 44% of them actually received bill increases, thus contributing to their energy burden, which is obviously not ideal. And so PG&E is now attempting to address this by emphasizing the education aspect of the behavioral demand response programs and what these people need to do. On the home upgrades and retrofits, the Independent Electricity System Operator of Ontario did a remote First Nations energy efficiency program. I know there was one in that BC Hydro did that was really interesting in terms of unintended consequences, because they went out with a great energy efficiency program, and then when they showed up in those northern communities, realized that all of them were on diesel generators and not very happy to be told about kilowatt hour reductions. But in this one, I also found that the efforts really only worked if they were able to make sure that the funding is long-term and continues to be available, because there was a huge trust barrier, obviously, because of historical issues. And so building that trust was very much something that was required before they could actually roll anything out. Also having to put in and train local installers, etc., was really important. There's a really interesting one. Vermont Gas offers electric heat pump water heaters to natural gas customers, because Vermont has really ambitious decarbonisation goals. And so an unintended consequence of the clean energy transition in general is obviously that the rising cost of natural gas for those who can't afford to participate will lead to increases in their bills, and obviously be burdened by the cost of actually having to maintain the natural gas infrastructure. And so what Vermont Gas does in order to address this is they actually developed additional revenue streams. For example, selling, installing, and maintaining electric heat pump water heaters, and reinvests those profits into their own natural gas infrastructure so that they can continue to allow affordable gas rates and increased assistance for particularly vulnerable customers. And then, I don't know if you guys know, I'm very sad because I'm not sure that this great initiative is going to survive this administration, but the Department of Energy had the Justice 40 initiative that directed 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities. But an unintended consequence of the program was that there was a huge gap between, communities that were well linked in with those kind of federal programs already, and those particularly rural municipalities that really didn't have the resources or capacity or knowledge of how to apply to them. And so what the DOE did is it developed a regional approach starting in the US Gulf South, where they partner with local organizations and nonprofits to provide the necessary tools and resources. And then National Grid, which is another really big utility in the Northeast, is the first and only one in the whole country that has created an Indigenous community liaison. She's wonderful. Her name's Danielle. But what, of course, happened, because it's such a novel position and seen to be quite important, she's being torn into a million places, and all the utilities are trying to get a hold of her and get them to help her figure out their liaison with Indigenous community, and that has really taken away her attention from actually being able to foster opportunities in her own Indigenous community and in the region that National Grid is actually focusing on. So some very quick first findings. The report is hopefully going to be released by the end of the year. The numbers of hidden and hard to reach energy users were significantly greater than we initially hypothesized. So we wrote a characterization in 2020 that reviewed over 1,000 pieces of literature, where we then estimated it was maybe 2/3 of energy users. That has been largely backed up by our Portuguese colleagues. I just released a paper where they actually took the Eurostat statistics to actually try and get real numbers for the different categories of hard to reach energy users. From both of our work, we've shown that this is an extremely diverse cohort and goes well beyond low income, and that a lot of the energy hardship programs are largely focused on low income as a metric. They're often designed by top down, really usually quite poorly characterized energy users. And we have found in several investigations looking at the methodologies of those programs that they do have several methodological failings, particularly around that lack of participatory co-design process with community organizations. A lot of the issues come from our own blind spots and biases, not understanding end user needs, the lived experiences. We have usually those of us who make the decisions and design programs and interventions in the energy system are usually have quite Eurocentric worldviews, and obviously class and cultural privileges and biases that affect the usefulness of our design. And then finally, we all know that it's really important. All of this research over the last 6 years has shown how important it is to involve community middle actors and navigators, but they're very often gatekeepers, because they're usually also what you could call hard to reach for us, especially if we haven't developed the trusted relationships with them. They're overworked and undervalued usually. They suffer from similar levels of distrust as those who we are trying to reach. And it's particularly important that we make sure how we respect and acknowledge them and their communities' data stories and suffering is done in a probably much more careful way than we're doing it right now. And I'm going to leave it at that. Any questions, or if you want to get in touch and look out for the report, here's my email. Thank you.
Thank you, Sea. That was impressive. So many insights in such a short time. Any questions from the audience?
Thank you. This is just a side question. It occurs to me how many hundreds of thousands of people in America live in trailer parks. And I thought to ask, what kind of power do they get?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we actually did investigations into that, and one of our funders in the US is the Energy Trust in Oregon, and they actually have a really quite elaborate and targeted manufactured home program that was quite interesting. We did a case study on that, but they are definitely not usually can fall very easily in those hidden categories unless there are specific programs that are targeted at them, which this is one example, but it's only in one state, and California has some as well. But then obviously there's a whole lot of areas in the United States, particularly in the red states, where there is probably more, more poverty, more trailer park homes or manufactured homes that are not being captured by those programs and interventions. Yeah, but it's a great example.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any questions online? No, in this case, please join me thanking C one more time.